So we've had a few days now to digest the RetroGames announcement that they are remaking the Amiga 1200. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk a bit more about the performance that it might have and why that is actually really important. The Amiga 1200 has an expansion port inside it, just like the Amiga 500 did. And this has allowed people who've had Amigas even back in the day when they were new, when they were current, when they were supported, it's allowed people to increase the performance of their Amigas. You could add extra memory, you could add a faster processor, you could even strap chips onto the chips inside your Amiga and give yourself high resolution output. Now, my Amiga, which I have here, may seem to a lot of people completely different to what you're used to seeing. You could look at this interface here and say, well, that's not really Workbench, that's some sort of emulation or something. But what you see here is a Workbench replacement that was available in 1997. I know this because I have CU Amiga magazine from April 1997, and on the cover disc was a very generous gift, Directory Opus 5.1. Revitalise your Amiga with this top file manager and Workbench replacement. So you might look at this and think, well, RetroGames shouldn't be giving us this. This is just something that somebody's modded. This is something you could do in 1997 when these Amigas were still supported. Now I'm going to take you back to sysinfo. Over here, these are all the speeds of the various computers around at the time. But this isn't comprehensive, because you could add an accelerator card to your Amiga in the 90s that would make your 1200 go from being there to down here somewhere. You could make your Amiga 1200 perform much nearer to this end of the spectrum. I mean, the Amiga 1200 came with 2 meg of RAM, but you could buy a 68030 accelerator, for example, that had 128 meg of RAM. You could make it as powerful as an Amiga 3000. You could have put a 040 processor in it and made it probably as fast and as powerful as an Amiga 4000 to a degree. So this is one of the questions I had about the RetroGames Amiga, is they are telling us they're remaking it just how we remember it. Now, I'm not expecting to be able to plug a PCM CIA card into it, or a CD drive like I did back then. I'm not expecting to be able to plug an old mouse or an old joystick into the back into a 9-pin port. But they are kind of telling us that you could use it just how you remembered it. And you might not know that people will remember these Amigas a lot differently. They will remember how they had it. I had a hard drive in here, I had a CD drive here, and I had an accelerator a lot like that one. And this one here will make my Amiga 1200 it will sit about there. That is a 90s accelerator. This is why I was saying that I think we need to make sure with this RetroGames one, if it is truly going to be an Amiga where we can put this away, we can put this on display somewhere, just for safekeeping, to preserve the hardware, and just use this new Amiga as we would this. It's going to need to give us the option to say, hey, let's load Workbench, but I want to load Workbench and I want to have a 68030 processor in it. Because when I used to use my Amiga, I used to do sound editing, I used to do graphics editing, I used to use Imagine 3D, so I needed all that RAM. That's how I remember my Amiga. So if you're telling me you're remaking the Amiga and I can do everything I did with it then, I need to be able to do that. I need to be able to tell it is an Amiga that I could have had back then. So just to show where we were with the Amiga in its heyday really. This is an Amiga magazine, as we've just seen, and obviously in these you could see adverts for all the various things you could add to it. Now you could add CD drives. You could actually rebuild your Amiga. We talk about modding Amigas now like it's something that people have only been doing recently, but when the Amiga 1200 was current, people were actually rebuilding them into tower cases so that they could plug more expansions into them. Right here is an article about building your own Amiga tower. We all go on YouTube now and either film ourselves or watch other people doing this, and in 1997, when the Amiga was current, people were actually doing this. In 1997, Amiga 1200s were seriously fast, just like mine is now. You could buy all these accelerators. You could buy an Amiga 1200 with a 170 meg hard drive, and it would come with Scalar, which is like a PowerPoint type presentation software. You could do a lot with your Amiga then. You could use CD drives. The Amiga 500 had a CD drive, the Amiga 500 had a hard drive. Right here we see a Squirrel CD interface. I had one of those. That's how I ran CDs on my Amiga. Modding the Amiga was pretty much the norm. It's not something that's just happened recently. These are just some of the reasons why I say if we're going to get this remade Amiga 1200, we need a workbench where you can define the performance level you want and to be able to do the sort of thing you want to do on it, whether it be games, graphics, sound editing, 3D graphic. That would replace your Amiga. That will bring your Amiga back. If you had one back in the day, if you've got one in the loft that doesn't work anymore, if you've got one that you're worried is just going to keel over, if this new A1200 remake is going to replace an Amiga, it's going to do what Amiga could do, we need those options for Workbench. Now I know the Amiga operating system licenses are kind of all over the place at the moment, but the A500 Mini, I think that had some type of partnership with Cloanto, and they own the rights for, I think, Workbench up until 3.1. So more than likely, I would say that is what we will have. We will probably get the basic Workbench where you can type say and make it talk, and you can go through the various basic tools, see the boing boing demo. But I'd like to know if we are going to be able to have an actual Workbench that boots up, that we can get into the startup sequence, we can go in, we can change the file system and make it run how we want to run it. Now this Workbench may seem more familiar to you. This is just my Amiga running just the normal Workbench. As you probably saw back in the day, yours might have been a bit more basic, you might have had an Amiga 500, but this is the sort of Workbench I would expect to see on the RetroGames one. So right now I've made a slight modification now, and my accelerator is literally just running as an accelerator and giving me lots of extra memory and lots of extra power. So our RetroGames is going to allow us to have a configuration where we've got this, so we could run all the various bits of software we could. One notable piece of software I would hope that they would put on there would be some version of Deluxe Paint. Now if you had an Amiga back in the day, you probably had Deluxe Paint. You were probably using this software. I actually used this software to create my own levels for worms. You could create it and then just set a background color to be transparent, I think, and all your worms would drop into whatever background you wanted. But it would be cool to have access to this, just so we can draw the silly little pictures we used to, or we could try and do some proper pixel art. So RetroGames, what are we really going to be able to do with this Amiga? Is it just a toy, or is it an actual Amiga 1200? Are you going to be on to a winner, or will they be knocking around the Amazon Black Friday sale a year from now, heavily discounted just to get rid of them? But if it does just end up being a games machine, a lot of us will probably just put it to one side and go back to using these. Just before I go, I thought I would share something I read in this book, The Story of Commodore Amiga in Pixels. There's an article, a foreword, written by David Pleasance. He was basically the top Commodore guy in the UK, and the last couple of sentences on this really sort of struck a chord with me. Within the consumer products division, we launched a few models of Amiga, but the Amiga 1200 was by far and away the most popular and successful. It cemented our position as the #1 home computer product of the 90s. So here we are so many years later, and the Amiga has spawned a generation of computer savvy individuals, many of whom are now in high profile positions in leading corporations around the globe. These Amigas taught me so much about computers. The first time I edited sound was on an Amiga. The first proper graphics editing I did was on an Amiga. I work now using Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, and all those skills I learned on this. I am like the tech guy at my workplace. It's not big enough to have an IT department, but I know what I know based on just growing up with computers like this. I didn't just play games on them, I did everything you possibly could with them. And I'm sure a lot of you did as well. This one model of a computer that was released over 30 years ago, there is a reason why this is being remade. There's a reason why everyone wanted this remade when they made the 500 Mini. This was so far ahead of its time, and people learnt so much just from having this, that I can see why so many people just want to get this back in their life, even if it's just to sit there in the corner, just sit in their office. But I would advise turn it on and actually use it, because these machines were awesome.